everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about a book that I just finished reading yesterday, and I was kind of thinking about it, and I was like, wow, I have a lot of thoughts about this book. So I decided to share them with you, even though you guys didn't ask for it, because I care. Anyway, so the book I want to be talking about, I'm sure from the title of this video you can tell, but that is Jonathan Stroud's, I think that's how you say his name, Stroud's The Screaming Staircase, and this is the first book of the Lockwood and Company series. I originally was not going to read this series, even though it had a lot of positive reviews on Goodreads and stuff like that, because, well, I thought I was a little bit young. It is for a younger audience. I am about to be 21, so I was like, I want to be more mature and read adult books and whatever, and kind of try to leave young adult in the past. That's not going to happen, though. I do have a very, very soft spot for young adult, but my little sister, she read all of them, or all the ones that are out so far. I don't think they're all out yet. And she was like, you have to read them, they're so good. So she gave me the first 3 books, and after a false start with this one, I did finish it, and I have to say, I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. So for this review, I'm going to do a spoiler-free part at the beginning, and then I'm going to dive into spoilers. That way, people who have not read the book can still kind of get a general gist of whether they might like it or not. And people who have read the book can actually hear what I think about, the ending. So without further ado, let's jump into the review. Okay, the first thing that I want to say about this book is it has a couple false starts with it. So when you first start the book, it jumps directly into an action scene, right? And so my first thought was, okay, this whole book is going to be an action-packed, crazy, oh my gosh, you're never going to have a chance to breathe. That's not necessarily the case. After the first scene, there is actually quite a bit of a lull in the story, and that kind of threw me because it was such a very punch-in-the-jaw kind of beginning, and then it just dipped down. Which is fine if it's executed correctly, and I think the author definitely did have the ability to transition that nicely. However, there was a brief period where I was a little too much exposition right off the bat. We knew Lucy is the main character, the whole story is told from her point of view, it's first person, and she's a very good character, very interesting, but I think her story is a little bit basic. I don't want to say too much, but I think it is very generic. But I think that's also because I have to keep in mind this is written for a younger audience, and if you're going into it, just realize, and if you're an older person, just realize that it is for a younger audience, so try not to hold it to the same standards. I think her story is a little bit basic. I think so just generally, let me give an outline of the book before I go too much further. Basically what's happening is it's the same world that we live in. They just have some different hurdles they have to deal with, such as what they call the problem, and that is ghosts. Ghosts have now become a huge issue in this world. There's all sorts of visitors and things like that, and horrible specters and whatever, just floating around and causing mayhem. There's type 1s, which are I want to say type 1s are the really mild ones. I wasn't 100% clear on which ones were the super dangerous. I think type 2s were the dangerous ones, I think, but that doesn't really matter. So there's really dangerous ones or really mild ones, and basically there are all these agencies that are put in place to take care of these baddies. And Lockwood and Company it's this group of 3 kids. Kids are used more often than not as the investigators into this paranormal activity, because children can see death glows and they can hear the voices, and they're more spiritually or supernaturally in tune with what's going on, which I mean is an interesting approach to this. And I also like the fact that he used this story arc, or not arc, this story, I don't know, he used this as a way to explain why kids are so heavily involved. Sometimes you're reading a young adult book and you're thinking to yourself, why are there no adults? And I get that it's young adults, so you kind of want to have more teenager aged kids and things like that. But I'm sometimes it's just so unrealistic that kids would be the one dealing with the situation that it kind of ruins the story. In this situation, though, that's not really the case because it makes sense that kids would be the main characters. So anyway, that's just a general setup. There are all these ghosts, and these agencies are trying to take them down, and Lockwood and Company are one of these agencies, but they're really like not super accredited, and they just get stuck with the little cases, and they're trying to struggle through and continue to make money and to help people out and stuff like that. So off the bat, it has a good premise. Like at first, I was like, oh, it's just gonna be ghost stories, which right there, the appeal of just ghost stories, like everyone loves a good ghost story, right? It does grab you and does pull you in. However, like I was talking about before with the lull, there was a bit of a lull, and I was like, okay, I was expecting ghosts, but we're just getting a lot of exposition about these characters, which is funny because I didn't think so. Usually with a lot of exposition, you tend to start to care more about characters once you get to know more about them and things like that. But for me with this book, I didn't care about the characters. I didn't find that I cared about the characters that much until around 3/4 of the way through. And that's when it just kind of clicked for me. And the whole story just kind of came together, and I started really enjoying it. But that was 3/4 of the way through the book. Like I didn't think the first part of the book, I didn't think that was bad. I just didn't get that connection from it, which might have just been me. But I was like, okay, I like the dialogue is written well. Like I don't know what he could have done differently. I just think I don't know. Like the story was kind of disjointed too, which I think kind of threw me a little bit. Like it all wrapped up nice and neat at the end, which I'll talk about in the spoiler section of this review. But the first half was kind of disjointed for me. Like they have so many different stories going on. It starts off with this action sequence that sets in motion a bunch of other storylines, and then branching off from that is a bunch of other storylines, but they don't feel like it's branching off. They feel like they're totally disconnected, and then later you find out they are connected, and then oh my goodness, wow, everything's tied together. And the ending is very predictable. I'm not going to say what it is until later, but it's very predictable. I sound like I'm just crapping on this book. I'm really not. There are just some things that I was like, okay, I didn't really like about it. There's some things that I did really like. The ghost aspect was really cool. The way he wrote them was really cool. The weapons that he had them use, with whether it's their chains or their swords, they use swords because they make them out of iron, and iron hurts ghosts and stuff. That was cool to me. I appreciated that. I liked how he took a lot of traditional and superstitions. Superstitions, I can't speak. Like salt and things like that. And he incorporated it in a non-cheesy way. Sometimes it's hard when you have kids and you have ghosts because it's hard to feel like the stakes are that high because you know he's not really going to kill off the children. You know what I mean? It's a kid's book. He's not going to slaughter children. It's like if J.K. Rowling just killed off Harry Potter. Like, I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. So, like, I wasn't afraid for these kids' lives necessarily. But still, he had me on the edge of my seat a couple times, and he creeped me out a couple times too, which that's hard to do because I love horror. Like, I will eat up a Stephen King book. Like, I like horror, so that is not easy to scare me. But I was creeped out a little bit by this book. There were some moments where I was like, ooh, sends a shiver up my spine. So I have to give him some really big kudos for that. Other than that, I don't know if there's a whole lot more I can say without diving into spoilers. Overall, it is a good book. I think I gave it like 3 stars on Goodreads. It is a good book. I primarily enjoyed it for the last quarter of it, though. The first 3/4 was a lot of backstory, was a lot of bickering, I think, from the characters. Like, they're kids, so it made sense, and the dialogue was fun, so I didn't mind it so much. It wasn't, like, obnoxious bickering, but I did think there wasn't... I feel like that's why I didn't feel as connected with the characters, because I'd never, been in that situation, and it wasn't made relatable to me. Versus, like, I don't know, like Harry Potter, even though the kids were someone... I didn't read that book until I was an adult. So, reading the book as, like, a 20-year-old, and, they're, 11 in the first book. Of course, you're not going to necessarily relate to them going to a wizard school, but you can definitely relate to them with their struggles with homework or getting along with their peers or things like that. And that's what I think, even though I was so much older than the kids in Harry Potter, I still could feel a connection to them because they seemed like real kids and they acted like how I would have acted in that situation. At least some of them did. In some situations. Versus in this book, the kids, I didn't feel as big of a connection with them because they are in such a unique situation, hunting ghosts and stuff like that. But I feel like Harry Potter, they were in a unique situation too with the wizarding world and whatnot. So that's not really an excuse for this book to be like, oh, well, they're in a unique situation, so how can you say how you'd react? But like, there was just so much bickering. I don't know. I felt bad for one of the characters. I felt bad for George sometimes because I felt like he always got like, the short end of the stick and they always kind of mocked him for whatever. I think, I don't know when this book was written. It wasn't written that long ago though. And some of the phraseology I thought was a little odd considering a lot of stuff that's been happening recently. But also, I don't know. It's a kid's book, so I don't think the kids would pick up on like, oh, he used this word or this phrase or whatever. And that's not really the best word to use considering what's going on politically or whatever. But I don't think kids would get that. I don't know. I just picked up on a couple things. I was like, oh, that's a little odd, but it didn't bother me. I thought it was fine. Just thought I'd throw that out there in case you guys are like sensitive to that or whatnot. That was not meant to be shade at all. People have their own preferences and people enjoy certain things, but thought I'd throw out a little bit of a warning. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the spoiler-free part of the review. Good book. If you like lighthearted ghost stories, definitely pick it up. If you like some trio action of like the generic 2 boys, 1 girl fighting to save the world, then absolutely you're gonna love this book. If you like some potty humor and kids acting kind of like kids, definitely pick it up. Also, the ages, let me just throw in really quick, the ages kind of threw me because they are very young. I think it's like 13 to like 15, and they act so much older, and I understand you're throwing these kids in like traumatic situations so they're gonna grow up faster anyway, but like they act like kids one second but then act like adults the next, and I was like, that kind of conflicts sometimes. But again, it's not so big of a deal that I was like, I can't enjoy these characters. I did at the end of the day enjoy them, but it was just in the last quarter of the book that I was like, oh, I actually care about these people. So that's my spoiler-free part of the review. I'm going to dive into some spoilers now really quickly, so if you haven't read the book yet and you're planning on reading it, please go read it and then come back. Okay, bye. Okay, so for the spoiler part of this review, I want to talk a little bit about the ending. The ending was very, very, predictable. So, and I don't know if that's my problem or not, because I do tend to guess the ends of a lot of books anyway, and I'm not saying it because I'm super smart, but just because I recognize a lot of like the I don't know, the lead-ups, and a lot of authors do tend to go with the generic endings for some reason. I don't know why. So no, it's not because I'm super smart, it's just because I read a lot of similar books and they all kind of end in a similar way. But basically, like, the ending for this story is the bad guy, well, so they're investigating multiple cases, right? So the first chapter introduces them to Annie Ward, which is this ghost who was the ghost of this girl who was murdered. And so they're investigating, so for a good chunk of the book, they're investigating her death and like who killed her, and they think it's this guy called Hugo Blake, and they're super freaked out, and they have her locket, which is like her source, which is what she's like connected to keep her on Earth. So they're like, oh my gosh, we're trying to figure out what happened to her, and that's gonna make us all this money and publicity and get us more cases and blah blah blah. And then they get this other case, and that's going to this tremendously haunted house. Like, it's every room in this house is like just ghost ridden or whatever. So they go to this place, and like no one's ever survived a night there or whatever, so of course these 3 kids are like, we got this, guys. So they go to this house, right, and they get trapped in this room, and there's blood coming out of everything, and they finally get out of the room only to find a secret passageway that leads to the screaming staircase, which is what the whole book is like leading up to, and they almost die there. And then it takes a really dark turn where like the main character almost commits suicide by jumping down a well, and like she has to be pulled back by Lockwood. It was just very, very intense. And that's kind of where I was like hit with, wow, I actually kind of care about these characters. Like, I don't want to see them die, but at the same time, I knew they weren't going to die. But it's just that little realization where I was like, oh, I hope they don't die. But that story was like so the two stories just felt so disconnected that I was like, this annoys me a little bit because it felt like two separate books. And then at the, like, as it's getting closer and closer to the end, I knew he was gonna tie them in together. So of course I was looking for the tie-ins. So I was like, oh, it's not gonna be Hugo Blake. It's probably gonna be the guy that they're working for because he's super fishy and like the guy who hired them to go to this sketchy house. And that's what it turned out to be. So that was super predictable. We all knew Fairfax or whatever, the guy who hired them, he was gonna be the bad guy. And then it was like, oh, well, why is he trying to lure them into the house? And I was like, oh, because he's trying to kill them because they have the locket and he wants to get the locket and he's afraid that they're going to figure out who killed Annie because he killed Annie. And then earlier in the story, there was a picture, right, of Annie and Hugo and a bunch of other people. And in that picture was Fairfax, but they didn't realize he was in that picture yet. And Lucy, the main character, she released the spirit of Annie and showed her the picture, and Annie kind of flipped out, and everyone was thinking, oh, well, that's proof that Hugo, who was in the picture with Annie, is the one who killed her. But they didn't realize till like later that Fairfax was also in the picture, and that's who she was actually reacting to. However, when that first happened, I was like, okay, it's not going to be Hugo, first of all. She's probably reacting to someone else in the crowd of people. So, like that, I already predicted that she wasn't going to be reacting to Hugo, and they were, going off on the wrong track with that one. And it was just one thing after another thing after another thing. It was just like predictable. And here's the thing, though. So, up until a certain point, I was a little bit confused about some things, and I was like, I wonder if this is what they're going to do. I wonder if that's what they're going to do. And then I took a break. Like, I went to bed, I slept on it, and then the next morning I woke up, and I started reading, and the first second that I opened the book up, and I read the first couple lines, and I was like, oh, everything clicked, and now I see clearly what's going on. And I wonder, though, if I had just continued reading and didn't, like, go to bed or, like, didn't take a break, if I would never have figured it out, if I hadn't given my time to like think about it and to mull it over, if I would have just like been like, whatever. So maybe that's on me for like, but also, come on, people take breaks during reading. So it's not going to be like, oh, you should have read the whole thing all the way through. It's not like you're binging a TV show where you're like, wow, that was a really lame build-up. They didn't spend enough time. And you're like, well, you're supposed to take a week in between each episode, so it's your fault because you binged the entire series. But for a book, it's like, okay, you can't, I don't know, whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say something. But basically, at the end of the day, the ending was super predictable, and it was a little disappointing. There was enough action in it, though, and that's where I thought the pacing was a little odd, because, like, the first half of it was, like, the first chapter was, like, super intense, and there was all these ghosts, and there was fire, and people jumping out of windows, and people getting injured, and oh my gosh, what's happening? And then the next, like, stretch was just exposition and talking in history, and I don't know, to me it's kind of boring sometimes. Like, some of it's really interesting, but some of it was really boring, and I was like, I can do without. And then the last quarter of the book was just action-packed scene after action-packed scene after action-packed scene, and I was like, I need a breather. And so, because the last quarter of the book is quite a stretch of time. Like, it's quite a stretch of time. Like, the book is, I think, 376 pages or something like that. So the last three quarters, not the last three quarters, but the last quarter of the book, it is a pretty good chunk. So, I mean, you're reading just pounding through this thing, because it's so just, things are coming at you from all sides, and you just don't want to put it down. And that's where I felt like I really got sucked in, because it was just things happening all the time, and interesting things. And it wasn't just like ghosts trying to kill him every 2 seconds. It was like, I don't know, different kinds of action. So it was interesting. It was really good. The last part of it was really good, but I felt like if that had consistently stayed like that, not constant action-packed, because that would have been just taking your breath away every 2 seconds and you would never get a chance to breathe, but some good dialogue, because I thought the dialogue improved a lot by the end of the book. some good character development. I thought there was some really touching moments in the last part of the book. But like, man, some of the dark stuff, I was like, that is really dark. Like, Lucy almost diving into a well to kill herself to get away from the screaming noises. Like, oof. That's dark. For a kid's book, that is. Yeah. That's dark. Anyway, that's my review of this book. Like I said, it is good. It's just not like, oh, I would murder someone to read this book. Not that you should murder someone anyway, but just keep that in mind. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, like I said, but again, it's no Harry Potter, if I'm gonna be honest. But I will say this, I did enjoy it a lot more than Percy Jackson. Sorry to anyone who loves Percy Jackson. I did read the first book of that series, and I couldn't read anymore. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up, or a like, or whatever you want, or comment down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!